I know what you did at the conference in Phoenix. The message sat on Rachel's laptop screen at 11:47 p.m., a jagged rip in the fabric of her meticulously ordered life. Rachel was the director of compliance at Meridian Financial. Her entire existence was a temple to the rules. She lived in an apartment that looked like a museum of neutral tones, her refrigerator was a grid of meal prep containers, and her career was built on the ruins of people who thought they could bypass the system. She didn't just follow the law, she was the law. But Phoenix was different. 6 weeks ago, under the desert sun, the armor had cracked. It started with a single email from an untraceable burner account. Then came the details. You left the keynote at 3:47 p.m. You told Jennifer you weren't feeling well. Rachel's hands went cold. She remembered that afternoon, the stifling air of the ballroom, the sudden, desperate need to be someone else for just a few hours. She had whispered to her boss, Jennifer, about a migraine and slipped out. But she hadn't gone to bed. The messages began to arrive like clockwork, documenting her every move with terrifying precision. You took the stairs, not the elevator. You were wearing the gray suit. You checked your phone 17 times during the reception. It was a psychological vivisection. Rachel tried to report it to IT, but the sender was a ghost. She tried to tell herself it was a prank, but the messages were too intimate, too observant. Then came the message that ended her denial. Daniel ordered the steak. You had the fish. You talked for 90 minutes. Daniel was a compliance officer at a rival firm. They had met months earlier and formed a dangerous, intellectual rapport. At the Phoenix conference, they had driven 40 minutes away to a hole-in-the-wall diner, paid in cash, and spent an hour and a half trading what-if scenarios about the very regulations they were paid to uphold. They hadn't traded secrets, but they had traded vulnerabilities. At Meridian, any contact with a competitor had to be logged, vetted, and approved. Rachel had logged nothing. The stalker didn't ask for money. They asked for compromises. It began with a request for a preliminary audit scope, a document that would be public in weeks anyway. Rachel told herself it was a victimless crime, a way to make the messages stop. Compromise 1. But it didn't stop. Next, they wanted a due diligence timeline. Compromise 2. Then, access to the risk assessment database. Compromise 3. With every file she sent, Rachel felt her identity eroding. She was no longer the woman who caught the rule breakers, she was the prize catch. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She started seeing shadows in the parking garage. The messages became physical, notes under her door, a slip of paper on her windshield, I'm not asking anymore. The final blow landed on a Tuesday morning. The entity demanded a file on the Hartford acquisition, the crown jewel of Meridian's secrets. Rachel sat in her office, her color-coded calendar mocking her, and realized she had hit the point of no return. She sent the file. The reply came instantly, colder than any threat, thank you. Now we have proof you'll cooperate. She had reached 7 compromises. The transition was complete. 2 days later, the world collapsed. Rachel arrived at work to find 2 investigators from internal security waiting in her glass-walled office. They had received an anonymous tip about unauthorized data access. They had her login logs. They had the timestamps. Rachel looked at them, and for the first time in 12 years, she didn't cite the handbook. She sat in total silence. She didn't confess, but she didn't lie. She simply ceased to be the person they thought she was. She was placed on administrative leave. She went home and waited for the arrest, for the FBI, for the final message from the ghost who had destroyed her. But the messages stopped. A week later, the news broke. Daniel, her contact from Phoenix, had been arrested in a massive federal sweep. He wasn't just talking shop, he was the hub of a massive intelligence selling ring. He had been under FBI surveillance for months. Rachel realized with a jolt of horror that the investigators hadn't been looking for her, they were looking for him. The documents she had sent were so minor in the grand scheme of his crimes that the authorities didn't even bother to charge her. She was a footnote in a larger indictment. She was cleared. She returned to her job. Her desk was exactly as she left it. Her boss, Jennifer, welcomed her back with a sympathetic nod, assuming Rachel had just been a collateral victim of Daniel's manipulation. But as Rachel sits in her office today, staring at her perfectly organized inbox, she knows the truth. The entity who messaged her wasn't Daniel. It wasn't the FBI. It was someone who knew that the most dangerous thing you can do to a person of high integrity isn't to kill them, it's to prove to them that they aren't who they think they are. She had always believed that people were either good or bad. Now she knows that the distance between a saint and a criminal is exactly 7 small choices, and a single person watching from the shadows, measuring the drop. She still waits for the chime of her laptop late at night, knowing that she is no longer irreplaceable. She is just another person who broke, and the most terrifying part is that the world let her keep her job even though she lost her soul. The first month back at Meridian was a study in ghosts. Rachel moved through the office like a specter of her former self, her footsteps muffled by the thick, grey carpet she used to pace with such authority. Her colleagues were kind, too kind. They offered welcome-back coffees and avoided the word investigation as if it were a contagion. Jennifer, ever the pragmatist, had even given Rachel a new high-priority project, a forensic audit of the very department Daniel had compromised. It was meant to be a gesture of trust. To Rachel, it felt like being asked to perform an autopsy on a mirror. She was sitting in her office late on a Friday, the sun dipping below the downtown skyline, turning the glass buildings into shards of gold, when the notification chimed. It wasn't an email. It was a file-sharing notification on her personal cloud account. The sender was a familiar string of alphanumeric nonsense. The file was titled, compromise_08.pdf. Rachel's breath hitched. 7, she thought. The answer was 7. She opened the file. It wasn't a demand for a document. It was a single photograph, high resolution and terrifyingly clear. It showed Rachel sitting at her desk, taken from the vantage point of the building across the street. She was looking at her computer, her face illuminated by the blue light. On her screen, visible through the zoom of a powerful lens, was the audit report she had been working on for Jennifer. Underneath the photo was a single line of text: "The experiment didn't end because you were caught, Rachel. It ended because you were broken. Now, let's see if you can be rebuilt." She didn't close her laptop this time. She didn't go to the police. She didn't tell Jennifer. Those were the reactions of the old Rachel, the one who believed in systems. Instead, she stood up, walked to the window, and stared at the dark windows of the skyscraper across the street. Somewhere in that grid of glass, someone was looking back. Over the next week, the messages shifted from blackmail to mentorship. The entity, whoever they were, began guiding her audit. "Look at the transaction logs for October 14th, a text would read while she was standing in line for coffee. The Hartford acquisition had a third-party consultant. Check his offshore holdings, an anonymous DM would suggest while she was at the gym." Rachel followed the breadcrumbs. She found irregularities that even the internal security team had missed, deep, systemic rot that suggested Daniel hadn't been a rogue agent, but a symptom of a much larger infection within Meridian itself. The more she found, the more indispensable she became. Jennifer praised her rejuvenated focus. The board of directors began whispering about a promotion to chief risk officer. She was winning. She was more successful than she had ever been. And she was doing it using information fed to her by a stalker. Compromise 8, using the poison as medicine. The realization hit her during a board meeting. As she presented her findings, showing a sleek PowerPoint slide that detailed the Daniel network, she realized she was presenting a narrative curated by her tormentor. She wasn't an investigator anymore, she was a mouthpiece. She was cleaning up the company, yes, but she was doing it by removing the entity's rivals. She was the ultimate inside man. That night, a physical note appeared on her nightstand. Not under the door. On the nightstand, inside her locked apartment. "You're doing excellent work, Rachel. The promotion comes through on Monday. You'll have access to the Level 4 encrypted archives. We'll need those by Friday." The fear she had felt in Phoenix was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window of her bedroom. She looked the same. The gray suit was pressed. The hair was perfect. But the eyes were different. They were the eyes of someone who had learned that integrity was just a word used by people who hadn't been tested yet. She sat at her laptop and began to type. But she didn't open the archive. She opened a blank document and started a letter. To the FBI field office, Phoenix, she began. She wrote everything. Phoenix. Daniel. The 7 compromises. The documents she had sent. The experiment. The photo from the building across the street. She didn't leave out a single detail, not even the parts that made her look weak, or the parts that would ensure she spent the next 10 years in a federal prison. She was halfway through the confession when her phone buzzed. A video call from an unknown number. She answered. The screen remained black, but the voice was familiar. It wasn't a distorted electronic growl, it was a woman's voice. Calm. Professional. Almost bored. Are you sure you want to send that, Rachel? The voice asked. You finally have everything you ever wanted. Power. Respect. The irreplaceability you craved. Why throw it away for a moral code you already proved you don't possess? Who are you? Rachel asked, her voice steady. I'm the person you used to think you were, the voice replied. And I'm the person you're going to be. If you send that letter, you aren't a hero. You're just a failure who couldn't handle the truth. But if you delete it, if you take that promotion, you can actually change things. You can be the monster that hunts other monsters. Rachel looked at the send button on the screen. Then she looked at the delete key. The experiment wasn't about whether you would break, the voice whispered. Everyone breaks. The experiment was about what you would do once you realized you were already broken. Rachel's finger hovered over the keyboard. She thought about the 12 years of color-coded calendars and Greek yogurt. She thought about the cold, lonely downtown apartment. She thought about Daniel, sitting in a cell, and the board members at Meridian who smiled at her while hiding their own Phoenix dinners in offshore accounts. The distance between who we are and who we become is exactly 7 compromises. But Rachel realized there was an 8th. Compromise 9, accepting the monster. She highlighted the entire confession. She didn't click send. She hit backspace. What do you need from the level 4 archives? Rachel asked. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, the sound of a soft, satisfied click. Check your inbox, the voice said. And Rachel? Welcome to the team. Rachel closed her laptop. She didn't feel cold anymore. She didn't feel scared. She walked to her refrigerator, took out a container of meal prep chicken, and ate it standing up in the dark. On Monday, she was promoted. She arrived first. She left last. She documented everything. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't lying about who she was. She was exactly what the world had made her. Closing thoughts. Rachel used to think that the worst thing that could happen was being caught. She was wrong. The worst thing that can happen is realizing that being caught was just the beginning of your real career. Most people think stories like this end with handcuffs. But in the real world, the most dangerous people aren't the ones in prison. They're the ones who survived the experiment, accepted their own rot, and realized that once you've lost your soul, you finally have enough room to fit the rest of the world inside. Please subscribe to help us continue creating true crime stories for you.